Okay, these two gentlemen have been in the rail industry for quite a while. We want to talk a little bit about how tourist railways and tourist museums benefit the economic factors in the regions in which they serve. You know, this is kind of a niche industry. You don't hear too much about tourist railroads, not in the press, not in the general public, but thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of people visit tourist railways and visit tourist museums all around our country. So before we get into this and start talking about how well they do and what we can do to help them, Ken, Bitten, tell us a little about yourself and your background.
Sure. Well, coming up on 42 years in the railroad industry, so there's a lot to cover there. My background is pretty varied. Started out working for the Chessie System Railroads, and then switched from Class 1 to short line, operated private cars on and off the track system, managed different railroads. My positions are I'm the general manager of a company called Harper Rail Leasing, which is a subsidiary of Iowa Pacific Holdings, which is a short line holding company. I've also managed various times 4 of their railroads, and I'm also manager of passenger services for a tiny little short line in central Pennsylvania called the Everett Railroad. So over the course of time, spent a little bit of it in every part of the industry, and most recently, I'll say the last 15 or 20 years, has been focusing on passenger cars, whether it be buying, selling, repairing, moving, things like that. I've personally owned over 200 passenger cars and managed a fleet for Iowa Pacific, which at a high of 160, I think we're down to 100 now, Iowa Pacific being in receivership right now. So covered a little bit of everything: marketing, operations, a little bit of finance, a lot of mechanical, and know a little bit about everything and a lot about nothing.
Well, Al Harper, you actually started in the real estate business, as I understand, and got a turn into railroading. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. I was in the real estate business in South Florida, and a guy named Warren Buffett bought my company. And I tell everybody that most of that money that I got from Warren, I spent on railroads, and the rest just wasted. So that's how I got my start. Actually, I was in the transportation business in the sense of volunteering in active community things, improving transportation in South Florida. I served on the board of directors of Tri-Rail, serves Dade County, Broward County, and Beach. And for that, I was elected to the board of directors of the Florida East Coast Railroad from Miami to Jacksonville. So I spent about 15 years on the boards of those 2 railroads. And then I got involved with what was called the Florida Train. And trying to save that as a stockholder, I bought the Durango and Silverton Railroad. I like to tell people I got my doctorate degree in mistakes, because I made about every mistake you can make in owning a railroad, not really understanding how it worked. And I've got to blame my wife a little bit about this, because when I came up and said, I'm going to buy a railroad, I think, and she said, well, some people suffer from insanity, you enjoy it. And so that's really how I got involved with the railroads. Now, I've really been blessed, and I mean that's really to have the opportunity to get to do what I do, and I'm really excited about the future. From that one purchase of a railroad, I bought another railroad, I got another railroad, and then I got into the entertainment business because I figured out the way to make these railroads really successful. You not only are a preservationist, you're not an educator, you're an entertainer, and we're in the entertainment business.
Well, how big is the tourist railroad business and heritage railroad museums? I mean, how how many people would be able to come out in a year to an average event? What do you find?
Well, I can tell you what we do. Rail events, we bought intellectual property. I own the rights to Polar Express from Warner Brothers. I am their third largest brand, which I'm really proud of when you think of Superman and Batman and some of the others. So we're their third largest brand. To give you a scope, between that and a brand called Peanuts, Charlie Brown, this year I will touch 1.7 million people on our railroad business. We will sell somewhere in the range of $90 million in tickets, and we think we've just scratched the surface of what we can do with tourist railroads.
So Ken, this is just one part of the tourist railroad business and Heritage Railway Museums, because you have a museum also, I believe, at Durango and Bitten. You've been associated with companies that have done special events with different tourist operations and things like that. What attracts people to them?
Well, it's interesting you asked that, because one of the things that occurred to me as I was contemplating coming out here this evening is the fact that what we're talking about with the tourist railroad industry is a little bit different than a lot of folks here are dealing with and focusing on, because a tourist railroad is not really selling transportation. They're not in the transportation business as much as Al said. We're in the entertainment business. Maybe we're selling a scenic train ride. Maybe we're doing on service that's neat. Those kind of things. Maybe we've got a steam engine. We're certainly, in a lot of cases, selling history, but it's not pure transportation, except, as I like to say, when we take you back on it through time. But the concept here is people are going on tourist railroad to have an enjoyable experience. Usually, I'm going to say 95% plus, they're going on a train, which they may get off at the other end, they're coming right back to where they started from. And more often than not, the destination isn't the primary thing. Getting there is half the fun, maybe more than half the fun. So conceptually, it's a little bit different. Obviously, there's economics involved in both sides. One of the things that you and I had talked about was the benefits that tourist railroads bring to the communities they serve and things like that. I think part of the crossover that we got here is that the concept of people getting on trains and enjoying themselves, and the idea that people like to get on trains, is certainly the common bond we've got between us and the folks providing the transportation.
Al, what kind of demographics do you look at? Who rides the trains at tourist railways, and who uses the museums?
Well, what was really scary when I bought the railroad 4 years ago in Durango, I took the first train ride and I discovered I was the youngest person on the train. And I was 50 years old at that time. Had to change. We baby boomers can't be the reason we keep operating these historic scenic railroads. I bought a second railroad because of I knew that to get the top-notch talent that I needed to be able to spread the cost of that talent over more than one railroad. I bought the Great Smoky Mountain Railroad, and I learned a lesson really quick. That railroad, before I bought it, had started doing what was called Thomas the Tank. And they got 25,000 children-oriented visitors in 9 days. And I said, I can do that. I started a company called Railabus, and what I learned from Thomas, being now an owner of a railroad, was that Thomas made all the money and the railroad took all the risk. And so I decided to create a company where we shared the risk and we shared the profits. And I started out with Peanuts. I tried some other brands like the Lone Ranger and Dinosaur Train and some of those. Peanuts worked well, but then when the Polar Express came out, I was able, after 3 years, to cut a deal with Warner Brothers, and it has just boomed. And I will tell you, working with Warner Warner Brothers on more brands. We're going to see more of this in the future. So the demographics, people say you're creative, the events you do. I will tell you, we are driven by the demographics of what we do. We do trains, wine trains, we do blues and brews. I do New Year's trains, I do Easter trains, I do Valentine trains. All of them have a different demographic. And it's the demographics we pay attention to is how we're going to get people on the trains.
Very good. Ken, it seems that trains are ingrained in public spirit. It's something that, when you see a train, all of a sudden you get excited. Is that what happens when people get over to a tourist railroad or get on a excursion?
I'll say it should be what happens. That's what we strive for.
Yeah.
One of the things, and I've worked quite a bit with Polar Express, so I can talk about that. When you've got people getting off the train and the parents are wiping tears from their eyes and the kids are over the top excited, that's just a neat place to be. That's the goal, to make it happen all the time. And as an unabashed train enthusiast, I point out to the people I work with, whatever railroad happens to be, on a good day, we are the coolest thing in the world. Just remember that, and that's where we want to be. I said every time wiping tears from their eyes, I feel like we failed. Obviously, I can't anticipate that we're going to get that every time somebody rides Amtrak or commuter line or something like that, but we get to do that on a regular basis when we run the Polar Express, when they see Santa Claus, when see the Easter Bunny on Easter Egg Express, or get to see Charlie Brown on a Peanuts train. That's in a large part why people do this, why we're able to get people that volunteer to do this, that say this is the neatest thing in the world and be part of it.
Okay, Al, let's talk a little bit about the economic benefits that a tourist railway or a heritage railway museum can offer. I know you've got some numbers. Durango is not the easiest place to get to in the world. I mean, you either drive there or you fly in, and sometimes you fly in. But what type of benefits economically does that do for your region?
Well, we're a town of about 18,000 people. In the region, it's close to 60,000 people. To give you an idea, Durango, this in 2019 carried 193,000 people. We employed directly 220 people, and according to independent studies, that indirectly affects 2,000 jobs in a town that size. And to give you an idea, because we're a railroad where you have to really spend 2 nights to ride the full experience in the summer, economists say that the impact of the Durango and Silver on Durango is about $190 million. Wow,
that's an awesome number. Ken, let me bounce the same thing off you. What do you find?
Well, Iowa Pacific operates another tourist road in southern Colorado, and with only about 15,000 riders, and a study that was done not too long ago indicated that we had about a $6 million positive income or positive economic benefit to the local area. Tourist railroads range widely in how many people they're carrying. It'll be anywhere from a couple thousand a year to as much as 500,000 a year. And even the small ones have a tremendous economic engine for the communities they've served. Some railroads have gone out of business over the years, and one of the things I always say is that even a tourist railroad that can sustain itself is a huge economic engine for the community they've served. You've got not only employees and services and products that they purchase, the company itself is buying services from contractors and parts and equipment things. You've got the people coming in to ride, which are buying fuel, food, lodging, and then you start running multipliers on that, and just tremendous. Most cases, I'd say for a lot of the tourist railroads located in small communities, they tend to be the biggest attraction in the community. And keep in mind that as the tourist railroads bring in people to ride, those same people will go out and do other things at the other attractions. And a lot of the local communities are focusing their energies on trying to get overnight stays. And where you build overnight stays, you know, if you've got an all-day experience like I was running at Silverton, it's pretty straightforward. But if you had a 2-hour train ride like the Everett, well, now we're looking at how can we work with the other attractions, number one, to benefit the communities, number two, to make it worthwhile for somebody to drive a couple of hours for a shorter train ride. And so that collaborative approach is where we really get some of the benefits.
Well, I want to tell a story. I like telling stories, so you have to live with me. There was this hunter going through the jungle, and he came upon a pygmy. And the pygmy was standing on top of this gigantic dinosaur. And the hunter was so impressed that this little man had killed this dinosaur. And he asked the pygmy, "How did you do that?" And he said, "Well, I have a big club." And the hunter said, "Well, how big is your club?" And he said, 200 members. Now, that's what's really important, is the work you all do as a group. Because so many people don't understand railroads, much less the tourist scenic railroads. We need to get the word out. We need to get it to the politicians and to all the other people that are involved in rail transportation. Get them to understand the importance of freight, and get them to understand that, in one sense, people are freight, just as important. And the economic impact that the tourist railroad industry can have in the communities that it's in is vital. That we need to talk to politicians. We need to get the government to understand that. So you guys have a big club. You got 200 members.
So Al, staying along the line, I guess a lot of you see Trains magazines, right? Okay. In the back of Train magazines, there's always a section on tourist railroads and the Heritage Museum. And sometimes 6, 8, 10, 12 pages worth from different cities and different towns all around the country. Are there too many? I mean, have we overpopulated this industry? Or
Not at all. I don't believe it. Every one of them is different. Every one of them. One of the reasons Polar is so successful is we can make it adapt any situation, how long your track is, the kind of equipment you have, and make it very successful. In reality, there's about 225, and that number goes up and down, of tourist scenic railroads in the United States. I would say, we're in the United States somewhere in the neighborhood of 42, 43. And all of them will tell you that they're really becoming successful because of the kinds of product we bring them with a Polar Express. And I know that we can help those railroads. And I'm going to say another thing about, there's a lot of small freight railroads. And I believe that we can bring the same concepts, the same brands, and we can make a freight railroad that's really struggling do extremely well by combining some of the events and passenger service that we can offer. So we're really excited about it, and we think it's one of the great things of the future is working with freight railroads.
Well, Ken, you've operated on some lines that I believe also runs a little bit of freight as well as passenger service. How does that work?
Yeah, I would tell you that probably about half of the tourist railroads either operate on lines that have freight or are the same or affiliated companies as a freight line. For example, the San Luis Rio Grande Freight Railroad operates the Rio Grande Scenic Passenger Train. Everett Railroad operates both freight and passenger. Another line that I've been associated with, the Orlando Northwestern, operates on trackage rights leased from the Florida Central Railroad. And So ultimately, that tends to be a benefit for everybody because in a general sense, unless you've got tremendous volume, you aren't going to be able to pay for track maintenance associated with keeping a railroad in service just on the passenger side. If you get big numbers, and, John Silver is a great example, they don't run freight, but if they had a fraction of what they're running, wouldn't be able to cover the expense of keeping the railroad fixed up. In some canyons and stuff that you guys run, that's a big deal. One of the things that I'll mention about Polar Express, a neat thing about that is it's what I call an inward-facing experience. If you're running on a scenic railroad, you want to look out and check out the scenery. But if you're running some of the lines, they need to have your focus inward, whether it be showing you how dining service was done in years past, or having an Easter bunny, or having a full show like the Polar Express, and some of those kind of things, brings the attention into the train and the experience on the train, focal point. And that's a big deal. Back in the 60s and 70s, tourist railroad industry was just getting started, people would go just to take a train ride, usually a steam train ride nowadays. Well, we all live faster lives nowadays. The idea of just taking a train ride for the sake of a train ride, well, I do that, but I'm a minority at this point. And why do people ride trains? If it's not to get from point A to point B, there should be some other reason, and that other reason is starting to be what's happening inside. As I like to say, if you do something special on the train or out the train, then people ride. No one's taking just a train ride anymore.
Al, I want to stick with the topic there of running freight with our tourist railways. And you had mentioned, told me a little story earlier today about how successful the one line was because of running the tourist line.
Yeah, I do correct, though, Ken. The Durango and Silver runs freight. We carry all three of those cars up the track without any trouble at all. We're working with a freight line on the East Coast. It's 8.5 mile line. It has 2 and sometimes 3 customers, and then it has a great maintenance shop that does some good work. We introduced Polar Express to them, and we do Polar Express with one of my companies called Rail Productions. They're in the city, and they don't have a place for a North Pole. So what we do is very minimal lighting and sex for a North Pole, but we hire professional singers and dancers and do an onboard light show using Broadway talent, directors and stage managers. And this last year, we carried 6,000 people on that freight railroad, and we are now their third full customer and paid $800,000 in charter fees. And so we've made that railroad a huge success when it was barely getting by. So, that whole concept of combining what we do with small freight railroads in the right locations can really work well.
We have a success story in a Heritage Railway Museum right here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Up in Frisco, Texas, the Museum of the American Railroad. Actually, they were lured away from the city of Dallas at Fair Park with lots of money. The city of Frisco waved over $1 million and said, "We want you." So they relocated up here. Have you seen, either one of you seen, where cities and towns and counties have worked to put a little oomph in, little extra cash to regenerate and rejuvenate this tourist railway?
Certainly there are circumstances, and it's pretty wide-ranging. Some towns and communities and city councils and things are almost hostile, but the majority of them, recognizing the economic impact, tend to be, and there are situations, usually at the local level, where community leaders have, in some rare cases, actually sponsored and orchestrated getting tourist railroads in, or have helped financially. A lot of times that'll come down to assisting them keeping tracks in good repair. So it goes all over the board. And I will tell you that having been down the road a couple of times, when I'm involved in a project and looking around saying, gee, do we want to start a tourist railroad? One of the first questions I ask is, okay, what's the sense of the local community? Are they behind this or not? Because if they're not, they could be your worst enemy. And yet at the same time, in all kinds of ways, financially, marketing, they can be your best friend.
Al, what about you? Have you had any experiences, good or?
Boy, have I ever. Great Smoky was a good example. When I first bought the railroad, we were in a town called Dillsboro. And at that time, the administration in Dillsboro was anti-railroad for whatever reason. And it always amazed me that I would put 150,000 people in town, and the store shopkeepers would hang signs that railroad guests aren't welcome and our bathrooms are not for railroad guests. And thinking to myself, how stupid can you be? And they had a parking lot and wouldn't let us park cars there when we had big events. Lo and behold, about 20 miles up the track, a town called Bryson City. Well, they called me up and said, we'll give you a parking lot, we'll give you $800,000 to rebuild a steam engine, and we'll build a turntable. Would you consider coming? And that took about 2.5 minutes, and we left and moved our headquarters to Bryson City. They delivered on everything they've said. They've abandoned streets so we could handle our crowds. And now Dillsboro is begging me to come back and offering all sorts of incentives. And we frankly said we're going to be loyal to Bryson because they came to us when we needed them. So yeah, you see that. And it's so short-sighted by some people of what happens. You mentioned museums. That's an important, every one of my railroads has a museum. In Great Smoky Mountains, it is a Lionel Train Museum. It's got 7,000 pieces of Lionel equipment. It has a 50 by 50 layout, and I got it the old-fashioned way I bought it and moved it there. And it's hugely popular. In Seattle, at Mount Rainier Road, I have a logging museum. It's got all the history of logging and some of the huge equipment, some of the very antique equipment. And in Durango, I have a history museum. It's call it the greatest man cave on earth. I have cars, trucks, I have an airplane, I have boats, tractors, a whole section dedicated in honor of our military, our veterans, active duty soldiers. I have something for everybody, and it's a lot of fun. That museum is now considered in Southwest Colorado the third most attended visitor activity in the region. And I'm very proud of it. We get 115,000 visitors in the museum. So museums are important, and if you do them right, and here's another feature, I don't charge to go to the museum. It's a gift to the community. And it's also a great gig for me because my wife says, what are you buying, another tractor, another car? It's for the business.
She must love that. Ken, I think primarily you operated the tourist trains and Polar Express and things like that on tourist railways or on short lines. Have you ever worked the Class 1 with any special events? Or?
It has to be more limited. The Class 1s have, number one, different priority. Number two, a greater sensitivity to liability exposure. So not really. I mean, if you take the recent changes on Amtrak with regard to private car operation, they kind of give you a sense of where the corporate thought is on these kind of things. One of the things I think we've seen with, for example, the big operation by Union Pacific is that there is a value to a positive public persona. You know, as I like to say, gee, until you start doing some of these kinds of things, the thing that everybody thinks about railroads is the last crude by rail explosion, and you made me late for work at the grade crossing. And nowadays, when we live in a world where everyone is a stakeholder is not necessarily a stakeholder or a customer or an employee, just somebody that you go by their backyard or something else. It is an increasing obligation of all business to be aware of that and deal with that. And this is a way to do it. But, you know, they're kind of slow to grade. Short lines, for the most part, recognize the value of having some additional revenue, or in many cases, they've started up. One of the interesting things, if you go back into railroad history from 30, 40 years ago, is that a lot of the folks that started tourist railroads in the 60s and 70s and even the 80s started to go from that tourist railroad and become the successful short line operators and even regional railroad operators. And in some cases did so well in the freight business that they decided they didn't have time for the very labor-intensive and management-intensive passenger trains. So you've got a guy that used to have a tourist railroad who's now running a 800-mile short line.
I want to touch back on what you just mentioned, Union Pacific, for their 150th anniversary, their big 4014 across the country, which really garnered a lot of great publicity for them. You know, it really touts their heritage and their history. And can we see other things like this in the future?
Well, I will tell you, it is getting more rare for the Class 1s to participate in preservation of historic railroading. Union Pacific is an exception. They're an exception. I haven't seen that kind of activity on any other. We'll mention where we're most active with Class 1s is really Class 1 tracks, is working with Amtrak. Our production company does 2 Amtrak productions in Chicago, where we carried 60,000 riders on Amtrak, and we're in New Orleans, where we carried a little over 40,000 on Amtrak. And not on the main line, but it's all dispatched by Amtrak, controlled by Amtrak. It's a very successful relationship and a very difficult relationship. What you find in Amtrak is no one wants to take the risk of saying yes. It's always, well, I need to go and have you talk to this person. And it's, by the time you get the final approvals and you think you're finally there and it's gone all the way to the top of Amtrak and you've talked to 8 or 10 people and gotten their approval, and then it suddenly is, now, okay, we're all set. Now you just need to work it out with our lawyers. And you start with the lowest lawyer and you work up, well, it goes to this lawyer's, and then you're in Washington, D.C. with that lawyer. So I would say it is successful. I pay Amtrak $1 million a year, but it's not easy. That is a very difficult relationship.
I'd like to jump in a little bit on that as well. You know, one of the more recent trends in the industry is precision scheduled railroading, which controversial, but it essentially boils down to wringing as much as you can out of the least amount of assets. And so railroads like Canadian Pacific, which had a steam program, have kind of shuttered it. And the question becomes, and it's only a recent question, what about life for railroading after precision scheduled railroad? Because at some point you say, okay, we've squeezed everything we can out of the asset, but what about growth? What about stakeholders? What about spending money in areas where there isn't a direct result in terms of reduced operating ratio? And I think we're going to be a couple of years seeing railroads evolve life after precision scheduled railroading. The other thing is keep in mind that even for the huge companies that are now Class 1 railroads, a lot of this comes down to the personalities involved. Great example of that, Wick Herman, when he was heading Norfolk Southern, he had the 21st Century Steam program. A couple months after he left, so did the program. A repeat of what had happened with the Southern and Norfolk Southern with the Claytor brothers. So, you know, anybody that's interested in trying to see the Class 1 do more of the either steam programs or passenger car things or heritage things is always waiting to see. I wonder if the chairman is going to be a good thing or a bad one.
Staying on that topic, I know Pacific for a while ran some cars on the back of the city of New Orleans, between New Orleans and Chicago, and my wife and I had a chance over a Thanksgiving weekend to ride on that, and it was great to ride in these heritage cars. The service was great, the food was magnificent, it was all made on board fresh. Why did it not continue?
Very simply, cost of operation. Amtrak came out with a new fleet of baggage cars. They decided to put a baggage car on that particular train, and whereas with the existing motor situation, we could put cars on the train without having to pay for an extra locomotive, all of a sudden we could not run more than one without paying, I think it was about a $13,000 charge per train. Well, when you crunching that over about 20 or 30 or 40 people, the numbers stopped working. And so we were a victim, in this case, of Amtrak's expansion. And there were lots, as usual, that's only part of the story, but what I tell you is one of the reasons that things like Polar Express work is that they are able to attract large numbers of people. As you start getting into private car operation on Amtrak or things of that nature where you're dealing with a very small number of people, the numbers become much tougher.
Al, what's the worst mistake you ever made with tourist rail?
Probably marrying my first wife. You know, I laugh about it. My first wife and I had a religious difference. I thought I was God, and she didn't think I was. So my second wife, been the exact opposite. She's very supportive and really stood with me. To say I've made a mistake, I made tons of mistakes. But you know what? I've been blessed to have the opportunity to get to what I do. And I couldn't be more sincere about that. How many people get to work with great American treasures? That's what I work with. And my whole mission is to save this history. I'm a preservationist. I want to save the history. But I've also learned that the way to save the history is to make its presentation so interesting and exciting that people will pay a fair price for a great experience. My job is to give good experiences to make people happy. And so the mistakes I've made is not reaching that point. And I'm working very, very hard to do that. And I am preaching the gospel to as many tourist scenic railroads as I can, and now beginning to the small freight lines.
Al, staying with that for just a minute here, how do you promote your tourist railways? I mean, in this 21st century, social media, how do you reach the people that want to come and ride your trains?
Well, I tell you, I am the old guy. I came up when I bought the railroads. Everything was printed media, was television, some radio, and we absolutely sold no tickets online 24 years ago. Now about 60% of our business is online. Social media is what it's about. I have people that do nothing but eat, drink, and sleep. How to get onto social media. I can't begin to explain all the ways we use Instagram, Facebook, and I have a guy sitting in Los Angeles. 100% of his time is to figure out social media and to change with it. Because the changes are just one after another after another. And the future is social media. We need to keep brochures. We need printed materials. There's still a place for TV and for radio, but you better be in the social media business if you want to market anything.
Can you experience the same?
Absolutely. What I tell the folks that I'm doing marketing with various railroads is that social media needs to be the primary component of a marketing program that includes other media as well. It's not put all your eggs in one basket. You should probably have more eggs in the social media basket than the others, but no question about what Al described is 100% correct. It used to be back in the 60s and 70s and 80s where it was a walk-up business for tourist railroads, and you hope that people show up. Nowadays, most people aren't even thinking about showing up until they've checked out your website, or their son or their daughter or someone else check out the website. Brochures and other things for people that aren't computer savvy are still of value, but the number of people who disavow computers or disavow any technology are becoming fewer and fewer. That means it's becoming more and more important.
Let's touch on equipment. We were talking earlier about a shortage of passenger rail equipment for this industry to be able to grow. What do we do?
Well, it is a shortage. In fact, I met somebody from Togo, my newest, closest friend, who says they might have some cars. It's hard to find cars. The problem is you get certain kinds of cars that don't work for events. The double-decker cars generally don't work for an event because often you can't go from car to car, and if it's a car, you've got very few people on top and not very many, or a different use below. So we need transit cars. The good news is several transit lines that are looking at buying a bunch of new cars. So 3 years out, 4 years out, maybe there'll be more cars. But right now, I talk to everybody that has rail cars. I have people that want to expand that want rail cars. I have people that want to do the events, the kinds of events we offer that need passenger cars, and there's a real scarcity.
Ken, what do you see?
Well, certainly that's my wheelhouse as a passenger guy. And the truth of the matter is the vast majority of tourist railroads are using equipment that is built somewhere between 1910 and 1960. There really hasn't been that much built in the U.S. market since then. A lot of what was built since then is still in service. Think about it, the average age of Amtrak's fleet of cars is now older than the average age when they started in 1971 with all hand-me-downs from the Class 1s. Part of the tourist railroad thing is you're trying to give people a heritage or a historic experience, old and good. Unfortunately, as a good friend of mine says, trains break. Old trains tend to break more. So it's actually not as much a challenge of trying to find cars as much as finding cars that aren't so badly broken that you can still use them.
I see. One final thought here. If a young kid came up to you today, what would you tell him about railway?
First thing I say is you need to ride Polar Express. That'd be the first thing. Great question. As kind of a closing from my side, I want to talk about heaven. What's heaven? Each has a different definition of what's heaven. My definition is probably standing out on the platform of one of my railroads, watching in the night, a cold, crisp night, and that steam engine's coming up with the steam billowing, and we always have special lighting so it really stands out. And watching the faces of kids and their parents and grandparents, that's a heaven to me. But I got another story for you about a burglar who broke into a house and sneaking into the house, and all of a sudden this clear, this voice says, "Heaven sees you," and it makes him stop. He waited for a minute and then went a little farther, and again that voice comes and says, "Heaven sees you." And suddenly you realize it's a fucking parrot. And so he says to the parrot, "What's your name?" And the parrot says, "It's Clarence." And the guy says, "Who is the dumbbell that named a bird Clarence?" And the parrot says, "The same guy that named our Rottweiler Heaven." So all of us have a different perspective of heaven. My heaven is getting to see the people who love what we're doing. That's what it's all about.
Ken, closing thought for
Well, since we talked about youth, I'd like to diverge for just a second and say that I've had the opportunity to do some, youth involvement. And in fact, some have been folks that worked for Allo, the Durango and so on. And there is still an interest in a lot of people's parts, young people, about trains and about transportation. I just came to a conference in Albuquerque for the Railroad Passenger Car Alliance and had been involved in and visited with some of the young friends there. And it's neat because people talk about next generation and, they've got all the problems and all this and that going on. I say, well, I guess from my perspective, it's different for me because the young people that I interact with are passionate. They have a focus. They're not the ones that are, running around in gangs or doing drugs because they're interested in things like trains and railroading, and a number of them have made careers. And passing the torch is something that I guess is kind of in the back of a lot of people's minds. And I guess if there's a passing thought, it's to say that there's hope for our industry. There's hope for the tourist railroad industry and for the passenger rail transportation industry, because there's a generation of people out there that share our passion for this and are going to pick up the torch and carry it forward.
Ken and Al Harper, I want to thank you for our conversation tonight. And, best of luck on future endeavors. And let's see that little niche industry grow.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.